Hi everybody, my name is Kira Derryberry and I am a commercial and family portrait photographer based in Tallahassee, Florida. Now we all know that 2020 was a dumpster fire and as a result a lot of us had to modify and pivot the way that we do things. Now I do a lot of commercial work here in the city. I do a lot of magazine covers, headshots primarily for large companies, law firms, medical industry. I have a lot of that going on throughout the year. Now, when COVID-19 hit, we all know that the photography industry took a hit. Not being able to do large group portraits for weddings or events, and for me anyway, for commercial work, was pretty devastating. One of the plus sides, though, of everybody having to start to work from home was there became like kind of a boom in people who needed new professional portraits. But with that boom came companies who were redoing their brands, redoing their websites, redoing all their marketing materials, and realizing that they needed to get some new group portraits of their companies out. Now, how do we do that when we can't have people in masks shoulder to shoulder in a group portrait? We can't unmask them and put them shoulder to shoulder in a group portrait. So I had to pretty much pivot completely in the studio and do something that I wasn't intensely comfortable with at the time, but ever since 2020, I have really upped my game here. So today what I'm going to show you is how to create socially distanced group portraits by way of composite. I have a few case studies that I'm going to show you about how we did that today, and I'm going to show you a little bit of behind the scenes here in the studio for how we did one of our latest shoots, and I hope that it's helpful for you so it's something that you can maybe add to what you're already doing. You know, we don't know how long that we are going to have to be being cautious when we have large groups of people together, and so I think this is invaluable to add to your tool bag, the ability to photograph a large group, get them together in a portrait without them actually having to be together. So I hope this is helpful for you today. And Jimmy and Dana run a law firm here in Tallahassee, and Jimmy and Dana have their faces all over billboards, all over park benches, all over buses. They are constantly refreshing their advertising, which is great for someone like us, right? The benefit to having these shots so that they can be composited later for this particular client, and I'm sure for clients that you can think of like this, is that because they're constantly refreshing their advertising, I can offer them a number of combinations to create a new look for them without them having to come in here and do a whole new shoot. So when we do these shoots, Jimmy and Dana will come in, and maybe some of the other lawyers in the law firm will come in, and they'll bring in a couple of different outfits. We shoot them standing, seated, facing left, facing right, all over the place. And then I have all of these individual shots of them that I have as kind of like a bank of images that I can choose from, and I'll show you that in just a second. I also want to show you this other image. Now this is from the same shoot as that last one where Dana went and changed. Now you can see that this particular client really loves this pose. She has a few poses that she considers more signature, and so I try to make sure that we get those every time. But all of these women were photographed. This was in the middle of 2020, so obviously we were practicing social distancing, and all of these women were photographed individually in the studio. Now, I wanted to point out a couple of things about the lighting pattern here. You can see that I am using a very, very soft light. I find that that is beneficial for a couple of reasons. One, it's very flattering to a lot of the women that I'm photographing in the studio. You know, even if I'd like to use something like a little punchier, a little stronger, I find that starting out with something a little more neutral allows me to add the punch back in if I want to. But two, if, for example, I needed to flip any one of these individuals to make them work. Like if I needed to flip Rose the other direction because maybe I was going to put her on the end over here and I needed Rose turned the different direction so that the whole composite worked better visually, I could, because the lighting direction that's falling across them isn't particularly strong. I know we can see that there is a camera right to left lighting pattern that's coming in here where the shadows are coming in a little bit on this camera left side, but because it's soft, it's not going to be super, super noticeable if I need to flip Rose. So if I had really punchy light in here with strong shadows, if I needed to flip Rose, then visually the composite would not be believable. And what makes a composite work is that believability factor, right? So the other thing that I wanted to point out as far as believability goes is remember certain elements that have to be here. So if you're on a white background, we have to have some floor shadows if we're going to see the feet, right? If we don't have floor shadows, then they are going to look like they're floating. So we don't want them to look like they're just like lost in a void somewhere. So we definitely have to have floor shadows. Your floor shadows need to match the style and type of lighting that you have applied. So if it's going to be more of a a soft light look like we have here, then the shadows should be very, very faint, okay? Very, very faint. You can even see there's going to be a little shadow play under her camera right foot, but it's going to be a stronger shadow that's being cast from the camera left foot over here, because that's actually the direction that the light is falling the strongest, okay? So just make sure that your shadows are believable and that you're not like soft lighting an image and then putting hard shadows, hard bold shadows in the floor. All right. Seating combinations are also something that is really nice and beneficial. You know, they have a lot of media that is very strongly horizontal or narrow horizontal images. And so having images where we can have them seated is very beneficial. They've got places for text across the top, on the left or right. That's kind of the benefit of having that neutral background in the back behind here. When you're doing seated images, make sure that the perspective makes sense. Okay, so you can kind of see that we need to be able to see that one chair is behind the other one. Okay, so it would naturally fall higher. If she's going to be seated behind her like this, then it wouldn't be even with the floor right here. So make sure that some of those things visually make sense. Same goes for here, right? We're kind of jumbling up chairs as we get here, but the perspective makes sense, okay? Make sure when you're shooting these that your camera position is locked in, okay? You don't want to suddenly shoot somebody from a higher camera angle with the plan that you're going to be doing a composite, because that would totally blow your perspective, right? Okay. So let's move on. I'm going to show you some of the behind the scenes images, like just the raw images that we shot from that last shoot. You can see that I photographed, because I know that a lot of these are going to be on a white background. I went ahead and shot these on a white background. So you can see I use a seamless paper. You know, a lot of photographers also, when they're shooting for composite, they'll shoot on green screen or they'll shoot on gray. I have done both. I sometimes shoot on green screen. I find that I don't like to have to clean up the green color cast that sometimes bounces back onto people. And there's lots of actions. I know my friend Ben Shirk makes an amazing action set to clean it up, but I just saved myself that step. I know that this client is never going to want to be on anything other than white. So I went ahead and photographed them on white. And it kind of makes the compositing process a little bit easier too. But just kind of going through, you can see that we've photographed her in a number of different poses, okay? And all of these are set up on a tripod so that we will be able to photograph everybody else differently. Because we've been shooting tethered, the clients are actually able to make their selections while they're there. That is extremely helpful, right? Because then that means I can get right to work when I am done with this. So with the client being able to go through and make their selections, I already had a list of images that they had approved for use. I find that it is good to make sure that you have shot a lot of different looks and poses for the client, but that also you have encouraged them to choose many different poses, okay? Try not to get too many that look exactly the same. You know, that happens every once in a while where they choose two. She's like, oh, I like my chin up slightly more than where my chin is down slightly. But just be careful not to get too many that are identical, because you want to be able to have different options when they're in this, when you're trying to composite the images together, okay? So once I have our selections, I can go through, retouch them, and then have them cut out as PNGs. Now you can cut these out yourself. If you struggle with that, like I know a lot of people do, I also use a company called ReTouchUp. Often I will send a bunch of my corporate work out that I know needs to be cut out, that I don't want to sit here and process myself, and I will send it out and they will have it done in like a few hours. So in this case, that is one of those times where I just sent this out to ReTouchUp and I said, please cut these out for me. And they said, no problem. And they cut them out for me. And I don't feel bad about it at all. Okay, so I have a number of images of all of the women that we photographed and Jimmy. It was like all women and this one guy. So if we wanted to combine some of these images together, let's say I'm going to do like maybe a standard seating. So let's pick out this one. So now that I've got her open in Photoshop, notice that she's all in a transparent background. I am just going to select all and copy. And then I'm going to get her over here into here, and she's huge. So we'll just do a little free transform. That is Command T. Okay. It's kind of my favorite way to just quickly resize somebody. Command T and keeping, now it used to be that you hit Shift and that was how you kept the proportions, and then one day in an update recently they took that out. So now you don't hold anything, you just drag from the corner and it keeps the proportions correct. If you hit Shift, it like throws them out of whack. Okay. All right, so we're gonna get her where she needs to go ish. And we can always play with the sizing on this as well. And sometimes when, I've got this like void, I like to create a horizon line as well. So I kind of have something to anchor her on. I'm just going to nudge her down just a little bit. Trying to use her foot as kind of my guide and she might be a little bit crooked. Let's see. There we go. Okay. All right. So let's find somebody else to throw in this image with her. Yes, I know. All right. So maybe let's get a standing image of Dana to combine here. Now she's facing this way, so maybe it would be good if Dana was facing out. Do I have one this direction? Yeah, she's kind of turning her shoulder here. So let's pull Dana. Okay. And let's get back over here where she is big and just size her down real quick. Again, we can make, this is all just a rough estimate, but we can start to make that work. Now, Dana's a tall woman, and Jimmy isn't. So he's not a woman at all, in fact, but he's not tall. So it's often we're trying to sort of make those proportions work as well, where, because it's a composite image, we can sort of cheat that and make him look a little bit taller, which is nice. All right, so let's say that Dana is going to be in front because she's the principal player. Remember that when you're coming up with your placement, okay, that, your prominent people that are supposed to be showing up more important. Obviously, we think about that when we're posing people in a group, but that also comes into play when you are doing a composite, and you have much more control over that here, which is fantastic. So let's kind of move her right there, okay? And let's go find something of Jimmy maybe. So Dana was facing out that way. I'm going to definitely want to have him stand, right? Okay. Okay. And let's play here. Another thing I'll say while I'm sizing him down, when you're photographing bald men on a white background, it is real easy to overlight their head. With Jimmy here, I would say that this looks okay. I'm not super pleased with how lit the back of his head is. I'll show you. But, there are other ways in studio when you're photographing. You don't want to really change the lighting between people, obviously, when you're photographing, to create the composite. You don't want to make a lot of changes and make variables, but it is okay to maybe flag the background, or even if we wanted to, we could photograph Jimmy on an unlit white background so that there isn't any bounce that, starts to hit him in the back of the head. Just a little trick. I almost always, like if I'm shooting on a darker background, I turn off my kicker lights when we are working with men. All right, so see, the issue is if we make him too tall, his feet look enormous, right? So he's got to be like, a little bit shorter than her, and without making him look way too small. Okay. All right, good. Now, I kind of don't love his arm, so I'm going to put him behind her. And again, we are going to worry about shadows here in a minute, but we can sort of get him where he needs to go ish. Okay. All right. Let's find maybe another seated person to balance this out. Maybe it's a team of 4. Let's see. Let's go back to bridge here and see if we have got, do I have any other seated? Oh yeah, I've got Cami here seated. So, she is sitting outward. We used one of those. Okay. So let's use maybe this one, right? Okay. And I'll go ahead and put her on the top, but I may move her around a little bit. Now, the other thing is I've already retouched all of these. Okay. So I find that is helpful. Just go ahead and get your bank of images ready from your client, the choices. Make sure they're purchasing all these images. Okay. Because you don't want to just, I usually hand them over these images with the purchase. But make sure they have bought them, that you're not just dumping a bunch of images at them for one, for the price of one. But then I go ahead and retouch them because like I said, I don't want to be worried about retouching at this point. When I'm just creating the image, all I want to worry about at this point is, arranging and doing the composite. So let's see here. So we want to kind of get that chair even with the chair on the other side. And she's sitting up taller, so naturally she would be a little taller. But let me see, she might be a little, sometimes what I do is I come over here and I start to try and match the chair height. You know, use something for scale to kind of get that in your idea. Okay, there we go. All right, so now she's actually scaled correctly. Okay, all right, so she is sitting. And that, you know, that looks all right. I think we can begin to build in some shadows here. You know, we could, if we didn't like her forward like that, we could move. Now, that would mean that the chair would be more in front, and that would mean that she might be a little bit bigger, right? If the chair was a little closer here, then the chair would break the horizon line that her foot is on, right? Because she would be scooted forward. So this is what I'm talking about with the perspective stuff, okay? So if she's going to be in front here in this composite, we need to make sure that that makes sense. Okay. All right. So I think I'm fairly happy with that. Again, the nice thing is if I'm not, I can change it. All right. So let's get this out of the way. Let's zoom in here. All right. So now we need to kind of think about some of the shadow stuff that we need to work on. You know, there's a lot of different ways to do these shadows, and I'm going to show you one technique today. But just know that, you know, like anything in Photoshop, there are lots of different ways to do one thing. So here is what I'm going to try out today. So I'm going to start on the camera right side and work my way over. And with her, I'm going to select her. So I click on her layer and I hit Command click. Okay. Command click is going to select everything on that layer. Okay. And then I am going to create a new layer, drop it down behind her. Okay. And I am going to paint that layer black. Okay. So I should have a totally perfectly cut out shadow of her right behind her. Okay. Then I'm going to take that shadow, make sure I'm on the shadow layer, okay? And I'm going to do my free transform again. Okay, now there's a couple of different types of transform you can do, distort. There's a couple of different ways you can do it. I am going to do that thing I showed you earlier where now I'm going to hit shift. And now if I hit shift, I can sort of manipulate and drag this any way I like. Okay, so I'm going to hit shift and I'm going to kind of flatten out the shadow like this and create what it's going to look like. It's going to look like she was really hard lit, right? Okay, so let's see if that light's coming from right there. Remember, I'm thinking about where my light was actually placed. Okay, so the light was a little bit ahead of her and falling onto her, so it would be kind of like that. Okay, now it would probably not even be as long. So, okay, there we go. So I'm going to hit return. And that is going to set that. Now we can't leave that like that, obviously. Okay, so first things first, I'm going to knock the opacity down on the layer itself. I'll get it down pretty light because this should be a fairly soft shadow. This really shouldn't be anything super noticeable. I mean, that's 5%. Okay, all right. Then I'm going to go over here to filter, blur, and go to Gaussian blur. Okay, so when we do a lot of Gaussian blur, then we sort of lose it all together. But I'm going to get it at around 16.2 and bring that opacity back up. So there we go. There we go. So there's I still feel like that's even still too hard of a shadow. So let's go back and blur it some more. Blur, Gaussian blur. Okay, just really get a soft shadow under there. I mean, incredibly soft shadow under there. All right, so you see that? All right, now if we still think that it's a little too dark, just knock the opacity down. All of this stuff is non-destructive, so I mean, you're not hurting the image, you're not hurting the background. It works out really nicely. Okay, now for Dana's shadow, I've gone ahead and I've done the same thing, and just for the sake of time for this video, I'm trying to speed these little steps along. So I've created another shadow layer and just called it Dana's shadow. Now I've pulled it back behind all of the other layers, just like the first shadow layer that I made, because I want this to fall on the floor and behind them. We will work on putting some shadows in the layers in just a second. Okay, but I am going to go now to edit and go to transform, and I'm going to go to distort. Let's see if that works all right. We're going to pull this down, Now Distort works a little different than Free Transform in that it gives you these sort of anchor points that you can pull, and it can be tricky, but that's all right. All right, so now we've sort of got like this long shadow for her. Again, I don't think it needs to be that long because it's not going to be all that hard. All right. And then we'll do like that. Now we're going to do the same thing we did before where we did the blur. I'll go ahead and do the Gaussian blur before we do the opacity. Okay. Blur. There we go. Okay. And then knocking back the opacity. And it needs to be about the same depth really as the girl on the right. Right? Okay, so it's very, very, very light. Okay. There we go. Okay, so now we have Dana's shadows and we have her shadows. And I keep saying her because I cannot remember her name. Okay, so we've got those shadows in. Okay, then let's see. I am going to fast forward a little bit and jump ahead and get everybody's shadows in, and then we're going to show you how to put in the shadows behind the people. In fact, I think I'll go ahead and do that a little bit here just for the sake of time, but I did that same technique with the rest of the players in the photo. And then I have also gone through and masked some of them off. So like where it looked like Dana's shadow was like falling too far onto him because light would be hitting onto his shoes the way we've lit it, I masked off some of that shadow and just removed some of it. So we have what we have is very soft shadows all the way across the bottom. Boom, 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 taking them off so you can see and then putting them back on. Okay, extremely soft shadows that are going to ground them to the bottom of the image. Okay, the next set of shadows that we're going to do are the between shadows, the shadows that are going to fall in between the characters in the image. We definitely need to have a little more shadow play that happens in this darker area between Dana's elbow and Jimmy right here. Okay, so I've created a new layer and I put it between Dana and Jimmy. Okay, and I am going to just take a brush at about 50% opacity because remember, we can just build on this or we can take down the opacity. And I'm going to take a small brush, smallish brush, and I'm gonna just start painting in shadows that would fall onto him. Now it's a little too bold. That one's a little way too bold, but it's a little too bold. But what I wanna do is just take down the opacity until I feel that that makes sense, okay? So let's see here. Perfect. Okay, so now we have a little more shadow. That just creates more dimension in the image. That just makes him look a little more like the image, a little more three-dimensional, a little more believable. There would naturally be shadows behind her arms, between her waist here. Okay, there should be a little more shadow underneath her arm here, but of course that shadow should be very, very soft because the light is just going to be hitting right in here a little bit. So I mean, softer than what we have here, right? So I made another layer to put right here. Now that is way too big and way too dark. So let's take it down to 15%. And I'm just going to sort of softly paint in something here. And we are going to really knock back the opacity so that it's just a little bit darker underneath the arm here. We can paint some of that in there too. Okay. Maybe even down this little area here. Okay, just painting down that in-between area where there would be a tiny bit of shadow that would be happening right there, okay? Okay, and then we can add a little shadow under this arm as well. All right, and we don't want to put too much there because naturally with the way the light's hitting, the light would be casting a shadow this way. So, I mean, there's really not a whole lot to do there. I think we're fairly done. Let's go back and forth. Boom, 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 boom. Yep. Cool. All right. So lastly, let me just crop this a little cooler because that is annoying looking. All right. So there we go. So now we have a new composite image of this group of people as if they were photographed together, but of course they were not. This is so valuable to your clients. I cannot stress that enough. Make sure you charge appropriately for this. This is a lot more time on your end to, photograph people individually, go through the selection process, go through and pick out from your bank of images and create. You're really designing here, and you should charge appropriately for that. I wanted to end today's talk with just showing a couple of more examples of this very simple minimalist approach to composite photography. There are certainly much more complicated composites that we could be doing. But I find that for a lot of my commercial clients, that this very clean, plain background look, where we can drop people in and out, is very, very versatile for their marketing needs. I mean, it's very easy to swap backgrounds, very easy to put text overlaid, very easy to remove and add employees as they come on board or as they leave. So I wanted to share this one. This one was for a real estate agency, a larger real estate agency here in town. And they really wanted to set themselves apart and look a little bit more like they were maybe about to have their own like reality show on Netflix. So we photographed each individual person over 2 days. And you can see like this one is on just a plain gray background. This could be on any color background, the way that we shot it. We could put them on, I would recommend a neutral. We could put them on dark grays. We can put them on colors if we wanted to. We could individually take out each person and crop it to a headshot if we wanted to, because our resolution is so good on these images. The benefits of shooting with a mirrorless high-res camera, of course. But this is the type of thing. What I ended up doing with this one is I gave them several different examples of layouts mocked up with no drop shadows in. That way I was able to get them to sort of agree on the image choices and the layout of the shot. Sometimes I'll lay something out and the client hasn't relayed to me a couple of important factors, like, oh gosh, we can't have this person on this end or this person on that end. We've got to have these two people standing together because they normally work together. Or these two people don't get along, we can't put them together. So it's nice to be able to send a couple of different mock-up options for them to be able to choose and be able to give me that information. In the case of this client, I had each individual person select some pieces that they were comfortable with, and then I started to mock and composite things up. And I had a lot of feedback from the principal player, who is, of course, this middle person. And we were able to come to an agreement on which image was going to be the final one used. Now I'm going to show you this one that's a little more simple on the layout. Everybody is standing. Everybody is doing kind of something different, but for the most part, hands on the waist, folded arms, popping hips, arms on the waist, that sort of thing, the kind of standard poses. But this is one of those times where I had presented them a different mock-up without the shadows put in. And they came back to me and said, oh, actually, we need to move some people around. They hadn't relayed to me that this woman was actually one of the principal players. I was under the impression that this individual had been the only one that was a principal player. So I had her like over here, and so I just moved her over. And so this sort of feedback is really good. You'll notice that we've got drop shadows coming in between all the people, just to sort of make it feel a little more three-dimensional. This one actually also works really well as a half crop, so without the feet. I actually, when I delivered this to the client, I gave them the full crop so that they would have it, but I also gave them a half crop just at the waist here, or maybe just below, just at kind of hip length here, because some of the shoe choices I kind of found questionable. This is not me being judgy. This was kind of like, I don't think the client, when we talked about wardrobe choices, they did a really good job of telling everybody what color scheme to come in, but they didn't maybe remember, or maybe this one guy didn't know that maybe white and neon green shoes weren't a great choice. Now, we could have photoshopped those shoes a little bit differently and they wouldn't have stood out as much, of course, but I gave them the option. They didn't say anything about it, so it's totally fine. But anyway, I hope that today was helpful. This is a fairly it sounds kind of complicated, but it's really not. You're just photographing people individually on plain backgrounds and then cutting them out, retouching them, and putting them together however you see fit. So it's fairly simple, and it's a very versatile tool for your business. So if you're not doing this, don't discount it. This is something that's a bit time consuming. And if compositing is not your forte, or if cutting out is not your forte, or you're fine with compositing but you're not great at retouching, outsourcing, there's nothing wrong with that. You can always outsource, your retouching or cutting out your images out to a company like RetouchUp or something like that. And they will take care of it for you and save you a lot of time. My recommendation is that you find where you are bottlenecking. If you are bottlenecking because you're painstakingly cutting out each individual person and it's just not something you're ever going to get the hang of, then send that out. There is absolutely no shame in that at all. We need to work more efficiently. You're the photographer. You don't always have to wear all the hats. So I hope that this was super helpful for you. I have really enjoyed putting together this presentation for you. Thank you so much to my partners, Tether Tools. Thank you so much to Imaging USA, and I hope you guys are enjoying the show. Thanks so much for listening.